The Wild Wild West ended in 1969, and death has taken almost everyone since. 12 cast members, 11 graves and cremations, one survivor at 86. One of them was buried twice, 34 years apart, in two different states. Number 1. On a spring afternoon in 2003, a 68-year-old man drove his Jaguar over the center median of a California highway and hit the car coming the other way. Behind that wheel sat a 26-year-old named Kevin Burnett. Robert Conrad pleaded no contest to felony drunk driving, and a judge gave him 6 months of home confinement and 5 years of probation. The wreck left Conrad with nerve injuries that partly paralyzed his right side. 2 years later, Kevin Burnett died at 28. On screen, he was James West, the government agent who settled every argument with his fists and a hidden derringer. Conrad had loaded freight trucks and driven a milk route in Chicago before any of that. By January of 1966, the Chicago Tribune reported he was making $5,000 a week, and he earned it, refusing a stunt double for 3 straight years. That ended on the 24th of January 1968. He dove from the top of a saloon staircase, lost his grip on a chandelier, fell 12 feet, and landed on his head. A double skull fracture shut the whole production down for 3 months, and when he came back, the network would not let him work without a double again. 2 marriages gave him 8 children, 5 with Joan Kenley and 3 with Lavelle DeFan. Heart failure took him on the 8th of February 2020 at his home in Malibu, 3 weeks short of his 85th birthday. There is no headstone for him anywhere. He was cremated, and his ashes went into the Pacific. James West could survive anything the writers threw at him. Robert Conrad survived all of it and was undone by an ordinary road on an ordinary afternoon, second on this list. In the same year that his television series went on the air, Ross Martin buried his wife. Muriel Weiss had been married to him for 24 years when cancer took her in 1965. He married Olivia Parsons 2 years after that and stayed with her for the rest of his life. Artemus Gordon was the partner with the disguises, the accents, and the gadgets, the brain riding beside the fists. Born Martin Rosenblatt in Grodek, Poland, he crossed the Atlantic as a baby. A ship's manifest lists an infant named Marcus sailing out of Danzig in August of 1920 and landing in New York that September. He graduated magna cum laude from City College of New York, took a law degree, and then walked away from the law completely to make his living pretending to be other people. In 1968, he broke his leg. Soon afterward came a heart attack severe enough to nearly kill him. The production did not wait for him. 9 episodes of the final season were made without him, with a rotation of substitute agents filling the empty seat, and by the time he was well enough to return, CBS had already canceled the show. For that battered 4th season, he received the only Emmy nomination of his career. On the 3rd of July, 1981, he finished a tennis game in Ramona, California, and his heart stopped. Doctors pronounced him dead on arrival at Pomerado Hospital at 61. He lies at Mount Sinai Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles. The man with 100 faces could become anybody. Ross Martin was the one man on that call sheet who could genuinely have chosen a quieter life, and he chose this one instead. At number 3, a man who was buried twice, in 2 different states, 34 years apart. On the 30th of August, 1973, Michael Dunn was found dead in his room at the Cadogan Hotel in Chelsea, London. He was 38 years old. The New York Times reported his cause of death as undisclosed, and that one word fed decades of whispering about suicide. An autopsy had already settled it. His spine had never let his lungs grow properly, and the strain on his heart had finally stopped it. Dr. Miguelito Loveless was the courtly, brilliant inventor who wanted the West back and would kill thousands to get it. Born Gary Neal Miller in Shattuck, Oklahoma, he was reading and playing piano at around 3 and enrolled at the University of Michigan at 15. He earned a Tony nomination for The Ballad of the Sad Cafe and an Academy Award nomination for Ship of Fools, and Hollywood still mostly offered him novelty parts. Phoebe Dorin, who sang beside him on that show, remembered the letters. Children with conditions like his own wrote to him about being lonely, and some of them wrote about wanting to die. He answered every one of them himself. A few of those children he went to visit in person. They buried him on the 10th of September 1973 at Lauderdale Memorial Park Cemetery in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, near where his parents had retired. 34 years later, 3 cousins had him disinterred and driven home to Oklahoma, where he was reburied beside Fred and Jewel Miller at Sunset Memorial Park Cemetery in Norman. Lovelace spent 4 seasons trying to take the world back from the people who had it. Michael Dunn spent his 38 years answering mail from children nobody else was writing to. If Dr. Lovelace is the villain you still think about, say so in the comments. Tell me which of his episodes has stayed with you the longest. 4. He landed one of the most famous parts in American television, lost it after a few days of shooting, and spent the rest of his life saying it was the best thing that ever happened to him. Richard Kiel had already filmed part of the pilot for the 1970s Hulk series when producers decided he was tall but not bulky enough and handed the role to a bodybuilder named Lou Ferrigno. Kiel had sight in only one eye. The full contact lenses the makeup demanded were agony, and he walked away relieved. Voltaire was 7 feet of silent muscle standing behind a villain who came up to his belt buckle. His height came from a condition caused by an excess of human growth hormone, and it made him a curiosity long before it made him a living. Before the work came in, he sold vacuum cleaners door to door, bounced at nightclubs, sold cemetery plots, and taught night school mathematics in Burbank. Then a pair of steel teeth changed everything. As Jaws in 2 James Bond films, he became recognizable in countries where nobody had ever heard his name. Kiel was a born-again Christian who said openly that his faith was what pulled him out of alcoholism. He married Diane Rogers in 1974 and stayed married to her for 40 years, until the day he died, and they had 4 children and 9 grandchildren between them. Heart disease took him on the 10th of September 2014 at St. Agnes Medical Center in Fresno, California, 3 days short of his 75th birthday. He rests at Belmont Memorial Park in Fresno. Voltaire never spoke a single word. Richard Kiel spent his whole second act talking, mostly about the drinking he beat and the people who had underestimated him. Number 5. In 1955, she stood in the Utah desert downwind of a nuclear test site and made a film. 220 people worked on The Conqueror. By the end of 1980, 91 of them had developed some form of cancer, and 46 of them had died of it. John Wayne was one. Susan Hayward was another. Agnes Moorehead was a third. Emma Valentine was the wealthy society matchmaker who arranged the weddings and then had the husbands killed. The daughter of a Presbyterian minister, Moorehead took a biology degree, then a master's in English and public speaking, then graduated with honors from the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in 1929. Orson Welles made her one of the principal players in his Mercury Company in 1937. 4 times the Academy nominated her for Best Supporting Actress, and 4 times she went home without the statue. 6 Emmy nominations for Bewitched went the same way. The one acting Emmy she did win, in 1967, came from this Western, and it remains the only acting Emmy the series ever produced. She married twice, to John Griffith Lee and then to Robert Gist, and both marriages ended in divorce. A boy named Sean Lee was raised in her house until he was 18, and her will left him nothing. Uterine cancer killed her on the 30th of April, 1974, at Mayo Clinic Hospital in Rochester, Minnesota. She was 73. Her family entombed her in the Abbey Mausoleum at Dayton Memorial Park in Dayton, Ohio, beside her parents and her sister, in the town where her father had preached his last sermons. The matchmaker killed for money and got away with it for years. Agnes Moorehead was killed by a desert somebody else told her was safe. The next name belongs to the only person from this cast still living, and she got the job because a producer walked into a nightclub. 6th. Her career-defining partnership ended because another woman married her partner. Phoebe Dorin and Michael Dunn worked New York clubs as a song and comedy act. Billed as Michael Dunn and Phoebe, a pairing the actor Roddy McDowall had encouraged them to try. Producers saw them perform and hired the 2 of them together for television as a set. Then Dunn married in 1966. His wife wanted the act finished, and it was finished. Antoinette was the villain's singing companion, harmonizing with him between the schemes and the death traps. Dorin was born in New York City in June of 1940, and she came to that soundstage as a genuine nightclub performer rather than a starlet. There is a story from those years that says a great deal about the pair of them. A costume trapped her underwater during filming, and her tiny co-star went straight in after her and got her loose. She kept working long after the Western ended, through radio drama, film, and television, with credits reaching from the 1960s all the way to a television appearance in 2018. As of this year, she is 86. Antoinette existed to stand beside somebody else and sing the harmony line. Phoebe Dorin is the last one left, and her memory is the reason anybody knows what the man beside her did with his mail. 7 on this list. In 1959, a Los Angeles County jury convicted a former police officer turned bail bondsman of conspiracy to commit robbery and of first-degree murder, and a judge sent him to prison for life. The man was named Victor Francis Buono. His son, aged 21 and barely started as an actor, carried exactly the same name. Count Manzeppi was the theatrical sorcerer and thief who staged armed robbery as though it were a magic act. The conviction is preserved in the published California appellate decision, so this is court record rather than rumor. Parole came after 7 years, and then he had to serve more time on an older conviction for smuggling birds, and he went on managing his son's affairs from inside. The son, meanwhile, had already been nominated for an Academy Award at 24 for Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and Hollywood promptly locked him into villains defined by his size. King Tut on Batman, Foreign Menaces, men decades older than he was. Buono made his own way around it. He recorded a comedy album that climbed to number 66 on the Billboard chart, published a book of comic verse, and recited poems on The Tonight Show, including one called Fat Man's Prayer. Buono never married. On New Year's Day of 1982, a heart attack killed him at his home in Apple Valley, California, at 43. He was entombed with his mother Myrtle at Greenwood Memorial Park in San Diego, and his name was never carved on the crypt. Manzeppi needed the entire room watching him. Victor Buono ended behind a blank panel of marble with nothing written on it at all. 8. A horse threw him in 1951, knocked him unconscious, and a second horse ran straight over him. The trampling aggravated a malformation in his blood vessels and left a back injury that never healed, and Ricardo Montalban worked in pain for the next 4 decades without making it anybody else's problem. In 1993, he went through more than 9 hours of spinal surgery. He came out of it impaired below the waist and dependent on mobility aids, and he kept taking jobs for another 16 years. Colonel Vautrin was the courtly Confederate officer who could pull a living man into another dimension. Hollywood spent years handing him accents and calling it opportunity. In 1970, he and 6 other performers founded Nosotros, an organization built for one purpose, which was to fight the casting practices shutting Latino actors out of film and television. He won an Emmy for the miniseries How the West Was Won, ran the island on Fantasy Island for 7 seasons, and gave science fiction one of its great villains as Khan. He married Georgiana Young in 1944 and stayed married to her for 63 years until she died in 2007. They raised 4 children, Laura, Mark, Anita, and Victor. Congestive heart failure took him at his Los Angeles home on the 14th of January 2009 at 88. He was buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, California. Vautrin moved people across dimensions with a wave of his hand. Ricardo Montalban could barely move himself for the last stretch of his life, and he still turned up to work. If knowing exactly where these people ended up is the reason you are still here, subscribe. That is what this channel does. 9. Through most of the 1970s and 80s, there was a seafood restaurant on North La Cienega Boulevard in Los Angeles, where the owner greeted you at the door in a white sailor's cap. Alan Hale Jr. did not resent being the skipper. He built a business on it, hosted his own customers in costume, and made a second living from a part that had supposedly ruined him for anything else. The restaurant carried his name until it closed in 1990, the same year he died. Ned Brown was the substitute agent handed a badge and dropped in beside James West for one night. That episode even winked at the whole thing, letting him mention a deserted island while a few bars of the Gilligan's Island theme played underneath him. He came from film royalty of a kind. the son of the character star Alan Hale Sr., and he served in the United States Coast Guard through the Second World War. His first marriage, to Bettina Dorr, ran 20 years and produced 4 children: Alan Bryan, Chris, Lana, and Dorian. He married Naomi Ingram in 1964 and stayed with her until the end. Thymus cancer took him on the 2nd of January 1990 at St. Vincent Medical Center in Los Angeles. He was 68. Respiratory failure was what finally stopped him. His family had him cremated and his ashes were sprinkled into the Pacific Ocean. That substitute agent was a man borrowed for a single assignment. Alan Hale Jr. borrowed one part for 25 years and had the good humor to enjoy it. Number 10. In 1979, the members of a union 46,000 strong elected him their president. The following July, he took them out on strike over money from pay television and home video, and he kept them out for 13 weeks. When the deal that ended it came back to the membership, Ed Asner attacked it in public, ran against him, and beat him. The man who led the strike lost his own job over how it finished. Frank Harper was the older, drier government agent brought in to partner James West when the regular seat was empty. William Schallert grew up inside the business, the son of Edwin Schallert, the Los Angeles Times drama critic. He flew fighters for the Army Air Corps during the Second World War, finished at the University of California in 1946, and then put together one of the longest resumes in American television, from The Patty Duke Show to Star Trek to The Waltons. In 2004, a magazine ranked him 39th among the 50 greatest television fathers. Marriage came in 1949 to Leah Wagner, and they were together 66 years until she died in 2015. He outlived her by less than a year. Death came at his home in Pacific Palisades, California, on the 8th of May 2016 at 93, with no cause released to the public. He was cremated, and his ashes were scattered at sea. The agent on screen existed to take orders from Washington. William Schallert spent his real life on the opposite side of the table, arguing with the studios that paid him and losing the argument in public. 11. Toward the end, he had half of one lung that still worked. A lifetime of cigarettes had given him emphysema. Arthritis had crippled him. And when 4 low-budget horror films needed him in 1968, he was far too ill to travel to Mexico. So they filmed every one of his scenes back-to-back inside a single month in Los Angeles, with oxygen between takes. He was 80. All 4 pictures reached cinemas only after he was dead. Mr. Singh was the exiled Maharaja who built himself a stone castle on Pawnee Reservation land. He was born William Henry Pratt in East Dulwich, London, into a family of British civil servants and diplomats. His father served in the Indian Civil Service. One brother became a British consul general in China, and 2 more followed their father into India. He went to Canada instead and worked as a farm laborer, truck driver, and ditch digger, including a year laying track for $2.50 a day. The costume that made him famous nearly crippled him, with 4-inch platform boots and shoes weighing 11 pounds each, and his back never recovered. He became a charter member of the Screen Actors Guild, and he was loud about the hours actors spent trapped in makeup because few knew that ground better. 6 marriages ran through his life, the last of them to Evelyn Helmore, from 1946 until he died. His only child, Sarah, was born on his own 51st birthday. Pneumonia killed him on the 2nd of February 1969 at King Edward VII Hospital in Midhurst, Sussex, at 81, 10 weeks before that Western ran its final episode. He was cremated at Guildford Crematorium in Godalming, Surrey, after a quiet service, and a plaque marks him in the Garden of Remembrance beneath a rosebush. A second plaque stands in St. Paul's Covent Garden, the Actors' Church in London. A castle and a private army came with the part. William Henry Pratt has a rosebush in Surrey and a name on a wall in a church for actors. 12th and last, and this one is recent. On the 15th of February 2026 at his farm in Middleburg, Virginia, Robert Duvall died at 95. His wife Luciana said he went peacefully at home. No cause was released, and the family announced there would be no service of any kind because he had asked for none. Dr. Horace Humphreys was the mild country physician threatening to shell the city of Denver from a falcon-shaped cannon. Duvall was an unknown television face when he played that part in 1967. roughly a decade into a career that was going nowhere in particular. His father was a rear admiral in the United States Navy. He served a year in the Army himself, stationed in Georgia, then went to New York, studied at the neighborhood playhouse, roomed with Dustin Hoffman, shared lodgings with Gene Hackman, clerked at a post office, worked at a department store, and drove trucks. Everything came afterward. To Kill a Mockingbird, The Godfather, Apocalypse Now, 7 Academy Award nominations, and the Best Actor statue in 1983 for Tender Mercies. There were 4 marriages, the last of them to Luciana Pedraza in 2005, and no children at all. What he had instead was that Virginia farm, and he treated it like a home rather than a retreat. In February of 2023, at 92 years old, he stood up at a county council meeting to object to a proposed data center. He was cremated. Where his ashes went has never been made public. The Falcon wanted an entire city to learn his name. Robert Duvall spent his last years arguing about a warehouse at a local council meeting and left orders for no funeral at all. 2 oceans, a rose garden in Surrey, a mausoleum in Ohio, an Oklahoma grave that waited 34 years. That train never went anywhere near any of it.